if you don't mind, why don't you start us off, Shiri? You can share your name, of course, and what's bringing you to today's meeting, if you don't mind.
Great. My name is Shiri Cabral. I am product manager for Lineage from ETL tools at Calibra, which is a data governance platform. And I mean, what brings me here today is I come every month, but specifically, I'm excited that we're currently working on our OpenLineage integration. So it's very exciting. We've gotten OpenLineage now from the integrated Airflow as well as from AWS Glue, the other A.
Yeah, thank you. It's really, it is really exciting. Thanks, Shiri. Next on my screen is Jens.
Yeah, hey folks, I'm Jens Pfau. I'm an engineering manager at Google, working on Lineage for Dataplex, BigQuery, and Vertex AI since I think today or yesterday. I'm here to learn about what's going on, contribute where we can, and also get some insights on how we can extend our OpenLineage compatibility. Thanks.
Thank you. And next on my screen is David, and you've introduced yourself a little bit, but if there's anything more you'd like to share.
Yes, and apologies, my camera's not working for some reason, but so David Todell, I work in HSBC. I'm an architect and developing solutions for metadata management, and that includes data lineage. So, yep.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
Next is Julien.
Hello, I'm Julian. I'm the project lead for OpenLineage. Today, I'm interested, I've seen this listed on the discussion, the job-to-job dependencies, which there was a brief discussion on Slack earlier this week, and I'd be interested in following on that.
Thank you. Next is Harel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Harel. I work at Datadog on data lineage. And I'm also a committer on OpenLineage. And I'm interested in today's discussion for actually the same reason as Julian, for job-to-job lineage. I can see that Julian Lanev, who initially brought up the discussion, isn't here, but I think I can at least seed the conversation with what I've heard from him. Nice to see everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Harel. And next is Eric.
Hey everyone, Eric Veliker from Atlan here. I look after our ISV partnerships. We've been working with the community for a long time. We're supporting Airflow and Spark and soon to be Flink, which I'm excited about. And I'm here to support the community. Let's go get more committers, more folks in the ecosystem using OpenLineage production. And also one thing I've been enjoying recently is speaking with product leaders at different tools in the ecosystem and giving them a lot of nudges to start thinking about OpenLineage. So glad to be here with everyone today.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to everyone for coming. My name's Michael. I'm community manager. I'm an astronomer. I coordinate these meetings. I'm here to talk about some recent releases, recent and upcoming events as well. And unfortunately, I have to leave a bit early because of a conflict, but I should be able to get through all of my items before that time. So without further ado, let's get into it. As you have noticed, no doubt, this is recorded. And here is our current list of TSC voting members. Recently added Peter Huang and Casper Muda. But we're grateful for all our contributors and their support. Here are, this is where we are. And the links are superfluous in a Zoom call, but you can always access these on the slides as we share them. Please join us on these platforms to spread the word about OpenLineage. And you can find recordings of our TSC meetings on the YouTube channel. On the agenda today, we have, as I mentioned, some announcements, recent releases. In addition to the job-to-job lineage topic that we talked about a moment ago, there's another topic about improving naming in the spec. Okay. So moving on to our first item, announcements, I wanted to share some pictures of the event at Data Council Austin. We had a panel. Eric, Shiri, you were there. Also Harel and Julian went down to Austin to participate in this lineage panel along with Ernie Ostick at Manta. And as you can see, a great time was had by all. And Julian did a breakout session following the panel. So we've heard great things about this. Thank you to everyone for participating. Kafka Summit, we got a picture of the big crowd in the room. And this was a joint talk by two committers who could not be with us today, Maciej and Pavel. And Maciej actually just recently gave a talk at Big Data Warsaw on data lineage for the streaming universe, which was focused on streaming support in OpenLineage. So thanks, Maciej, for getting out there and giving these talks. If there's anybody else who'd like to give an OpenLineage related talk and you'd like some support in order to do that in terms of, your presentation and that kind of thing, we're more than happy to help. You can reach out to me directly or hit us up on Slack. And why don't I turn it over to you, Shiri, since this relates to Calibra.
Great. I already spoiled it. I already gave spoiler alerts in my introduction, but we will be integrating with OpenLineage. We're working on it right now. We're in alpha testing. You probably have seen some of my messages on Slack, where we have been like, oh, it's not working. Oh, we got it to work. So it's very exciting. We've been able to get in alpha testing, what we do is we get real world data either internally from our own data office or from customers. And so we've gotten that from AWS Glue as well as Airflow, and one other vendor who is not listed with OpenLineage support. We convinced them to do OpenLineage support and they sent us some packets. So we're going to not only validate our OpenLineage importing, but also validate what they're emitting. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And you've been in the community for a long time, so it's great to see this come to fruition.
Yeah, it's great to finally be getting to work on it too. I've been wanting to do it for like 2 years. So I think 2 years to the day to this month. It's either March or April of 2022 that I joined the community. So it's very long time coming, but worth the wait.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I also wanted to share another reminder about this really cool event coming up on the 25th. So don't forget to register for this. Registration is required. You can do it at events.confluent.io, but you'll notice on the panel are a few people rather, who are on the call. Julian, joined by Kai at Confluent, our good friend Mandy at Ageria, Jens will be there, Ernie, Shiri, and Austin Krantz from Atlan. And this is moderated by a champion at Accenture, an architect named Luigi Scorzato. So this promises to be a great event. Looking forward to it, 10 a.m. Pacific time on the 25th.
Right. And the most important detail, which is not even on the slide, which is that it is free. That is very important. It doesn't cost $100 to register. It is free. So do register.
Yeah. That is the most important. I really, I buried the lead there.
Well, we're in the open source community, we just kind of like, oh, everything's free, right? And then you're like, wait, it's like sometimes I click on something like register for this workshop, and I'm like, oh wait, it costs money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this does not cost money. Just time. but it'll be worth it. So next on the agenda, recent releases. Actually, there have been 3 since the last meeting. Let me just hit some highlights quickly for you. We did a version bump basically in Dagster to support the most recent version there. There's hybrid source support in Flink for Kafka and Iceberg sources for backfill use cases. Improved these methods in Java for improved lineage there. Also in Java, we added some granularity to the HTTP response in an exception, and in Python added support for some auth. An important removal in this one, we have slimmer events from Airflow, thanks to the removal of redundant information from facets, and some fixes in Spark, Flink, and the spec. I think a sort of headline here would be the improved lineage from Cassandra. And thanks to Peter and for the many PRs in this release, and thanks to Mache for the after-hours CI fix, made it all possible. Moving on to 1.11.3. This was another large release, but we have built-in lineage so basically, I'm not equipped to get into the details. Pavel is the one who can really tell you exactly what went into 2272. But we added a couple packages to the release that allow extraction within Spark extensions, for example, Iceberg, Delta, and GCS. And you can read more about this in a README that he also contributed to OpenLineage there. So in common, we added support for script type jobs in BigQuery. So this is new support there. We also have support for telemetry. It's kind of like metrics forwarding, specifically to any micrometer compatible implementation. And also we added support for query option on table read in Spark, which we didn't have before. Also added file count to the dataset stat facets in the spec. And let's see here. Right, also in this release, big improvements in Spark, thanks to a solution to a memory leak problem. So shout out to Damien for more really impactful changes to the Spark integration. In addition to his contributions, we're grateful to new contributor Dolphinus Maxim, I believe, and Mache and Jakob really helped again with some CI issues. We had to get this across the line. And then just briefly, this we released this week, but I think the big change here would be the fix in DBT. So that was blocking for at least one user. And we also had some additions in Airflow and the spec. So thanks to all the contributors. And as always, you can read more about these in the GitHub repository and the release notes there, but also openlineage.io has an up-to-date release notes section in the docs. So now it's time for those discussion items. So if anybody would like to kind of be lead on these, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start talking about the job-to-job lineage. First off, sorry I was a couple minutes late. Last meeting went over, you know how it goes. But my name's Julian. I'm our CTO at Astronomer. I think, there are a lot of familiar faces here for me. And one of the things that's, we're looking to do is use OpenLineage more for, I guess, we call it job-to-job lineage, but this idea that today the OpenLineage spec captures dependencies within like an Airflow DAG if there is a data set between those. So if you have task A that writes to data set A and task B that reads from data set A, it's very easy to construct that graph, but it's not always the case that there are data dependencies. Sometimes you have what we call process dependencies. So for example, whenever this task is done, run the next task to send an email. It's useful to capture that relationship, that operational dependency. And so I just wanted to have a conversation around if this is something that the spec supports today and maybe I'm just missing something, or if it's something that, you know, we think we should extend this spec to support.
I can take a first stab at this, but please feel free to state your opinion as well if you want to add something. I think today it's not in the spec yet, so we talked about adding this a while ago, but this particular conversation has not made much progress yet. I do think that adding facets to capture this would be a good way to do this. So there are two levels. If we think about the Airflow DAG notion, I think there are two levels where we can capture this. One is by adding a job facet where there would be a job for each task in the DAG, right, as it's currently modeled. And you can add a job facet to say, this particular task depends on those other tasks and is a predecessor to those other tasks, right? So you can have the dependency before and what are the things that depend on it. And possibly it can go a little further if there's, you know, conditions or things. So that's kind of more the meta, what's the definition of the task? I think that's one level. The other level is capturing at the run dependency and at the run level. So adding a run facet and knowing that a particular task instance in Airflow that run this person time, you know, what was the actual task it depended on and task that it triggered when it finished, task instance, like the actual run ID, and possibly, you know, what the condition evaluation was or something, right? Like, so there's kind of those two levels to capture the task to task dependencies and then task instance to task instance dependencies. So I think that could be two different facets. I do think that exists in a generic notion, right? Like multiple things have notion of workflows and dependencies like this. So I think we can have a generic facet. I think possibly some of that information is already in the Airflow run facet, but like in a very specific to Airflow representation, and which is fine. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have this generic representation so that, you know, if people use different things, there's kind of a unified way to represent it. So that's what I was thinking about. I'm curious to hear others as well if they have opinions on this.
So, Julianne, not Julianne, but Julian, can you speak a little bit more about why the current solutions don't work? Like something like having a parent, like there's a job parent, and I understand that like it's not actually a parent thing, but you know, in the overall workflow, it's got that. So can you say more about that?
Yeah. That was something that, you know, we actually talked about as a way to support it with, you know, the spec today, basically setting the first task as the parent, and then, you know, everything downstream of it is the child, and then you build these parent-child relationships over time. I think like in theory that does work. I think where it gets tricky is like in some senses that's not the right way to represent that relationship, especially because I think there are other use cases for the parent-child relationship within like the Airflow context specifically. So like, let's say you have an Airflow task that triggers a Spark job or a DBT job.
Right.
That makes perfect sense as a parent-child relationship, and I think that's how we do it today. Now, if we go extend the parent-child relationship to also include downstream tasks, then you have kind of two different relationships that you're trying to capture with this parent-child notion. But it was something that, we thought about. And I think like to Julian Ledem's points, you can technically just pass this information in the Airflow facet today, or we could go build a custom facet or find some other way to do it. I just, was thinking that this general like workflow DAG process dependency pattern is probably common enough that it's worth considering at a higher level in the spec instead of us building something custom as a one-off. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. And honestly, from an observability context, right? Data observability, you want to be able to have a group of, a workflow or whatever you call it. This has actually been my struggle. It's like, what do we call that thing? The process, workflow, the pipeline, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
There's a different hierarchical levels. It's not just parent and child. Especially since different parts, you could have a section of one workflow, I guess we could call it that gets implemented in different places in other workflows, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't want to make any assumptions, but yeah, I fully understand and live with your struggle.
Yeah, thanks for asking for clarification.
So
I
what
think as far
kind of information would you want, I'm sorry, in the facet?
I mean, in the Airflow specific world, maybe I'll start there. It's really about like the upstream and downstream dependencies. So I guess if you go just generalize that to the OpenLineage spec, it's like the preceding job IDs or like the upstream job IDs and the downstream job IDs. Because in theory, like all of the actual within a job, what's happening is captured by that job ID's payload. And I think it's fine to say that the onus is on whoever's consuming this information to go like build that relationship. It's just a matter to me of where you put those upstream and downstream job IDs.
I just wanted to say there's a discussion going on in relation to that parent facet, and I think over there we are trending towards representing the two types of parent-child relationship you mentioned in the same manner. So it would be worth, like, I think, seeing your insights onto that as well. I'm wondering, in this case that you brought up with Airflow, if you can help me understand, what are the examples where you cannot materialize that job-to-job relationship from the lineage you would see today from OpenLineage events?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my understanding, and this might not be correct, so I lean on this group to correct me if I'm wrong, but when there are upstream and downstream data sets that live between tasks, you can capture those as the input and output facets. And I think that there's two like pretty basic use cases that I can think of. One is, well, the Airflow OpenLineage integration is great, but it's not perfect, right? It's not going to go capture every single data set. And so it's helpful to still know what's going to run upstream or downstream, even if there is a data set in the middle, because you can never guarantee that you capture 100% of lineage implicitly. So that's one. And the second is just when you have like certain process dependencies. So the example that I gave earlier is super common. Like you write an Airflow DAG that, has a certain number of tasks that do some, data transformation or transfer or whatever. And then at the end, you have a final task that says, send me an email when this is complete. And so that's an example of where that last task, send me an email, is not actually referring to any sort of data set. There's not, an upstream data set to it, but it is run after everything else is run. And so capturing that relationship is important where there is no true data set between the things.
Got it. Though, do we have a lineage over there actually in this use case? is there actually data transferred from the start of this process to the end of this process? So because I think I get the use case, right? So from the
Yeah,
observability perspective, of course, we would like to see the DAGs represented, elsewhere potentially, not just in Airflow.
Yeah.
And OpenLineage might be the vehicle to transfer that information. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, it might not be a lineage relationship at that point anymore, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define lineage. I think if you asked all 8 of us in this room, or sorry, 11 now, how you define lineage, you might get 11 different answers. My view is very much that like there is this notion of operational lineage to say how jobs relate to each other, without necessarily having data in between those jobs. So I think it really just depends on how you define lineage. But to your point, like there are scenarios where it's helpful to emit this information in the OpenLineage spec because Airflow is already giving us that type of information. But there might not be actual data that's transferred. Maybe that's also worth talking about, right? Like, is that the responsibility of the OpenLineage spec, or is the OpenLineage spec related to particularly data movement?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about use cases specifically because we run the danger of creating a complex spec with a lot of possibilities to egress data from one side, but then a lot of complexity on the receiving side on teasing apart for specific use cases. So we are on our side, on Google, we are currently mostly receivers of lineage, let's say, at least on my team. And our users are very much interested in the classical lineage use cases. We do an impact assessment, or show me where my PII column is leaking into, etc. Right. So here, it's very important for us that we only include in that analysis the traces where data was touched or data had an impact on the transfer of other data. Right. So there's sort of two different types of lineage relationships, I would say. So in that way, it's useful to, I think your use case is valid, right? But there's a danger of, if we put it into the same spec, that we have a lot more complexity on the receiving side to interpret the input. So
I think this is.
Sorry.
This particular thing, I think it's very useful for the data reliability, data quality use case, right? Like, because since there's a dependency between two tasks, even if there's no data dependency, that if the upstream task doesn't run, then you're not going to update the data, right? So you're going to have freshness issues or things like that, right? So I think it's important for those particular use cases, all the data reliability, data quality aspects, to capture those dependencies. And for tooling that focuses on like troubleshooting why my data is late, I think those become very important. So yeah, I mean that would be the main use cases I would put that category of modeling the actual task. But yeah, I think there's in the generic facets, we probably should look at not putting too many things, right? And leaving to having an Airflow specific facet to have all the details, like of what specifically Airflow does. Otherwise, we get something that becomes complex.
I think what's the use cases that we've found are, as Julian said, the data observability, the reliability, the quality. But we've also had a different step as well. So it's not just, what's the downstream effect of this DAG breaking, right? And to use Airflow terms, right? We have a DAG, we have a job, it breaks, and there's a dependency. So that dependency it might not break, but it won't be fresh, right? So you need to know that for your data quality. But we see that a lot. And we also see people starting to say, I want to be able to see if my workflow, my process, right? My overall, I'm trying to get from here to there, right? Like, think of it, well, this is a terrible example for most of you on the call, but if you're in the US and you're doing your taxes, right, there's a lot of inputs into that. And if you can't get your charitable deductions, you can't file your taxes, right? So you're trying to get to that endpoint, and you need to know, kind of how fragile is that whole process. That's something that we're seeing too, which is not exactly answered by having another facet, unless that facet is something like a parent facet, like a grouping. It's called something like workflow, where you give it a name and you're like, the workflow is doing taxes, and it calls job one, DAG 1 and DAG 2 and all that kind of stuff. Harel, did you want to put in your 2 cents?
Well, I was going to agree with, so one, I do think job relationships are important enough that we not miss out on them at a higher level in the spec. And it could be through like we can talk about the mechanisms of how we do this, right? Like, for example, utilizing parent-run relationships with some added metadata maybe on top of them might be one way. I don't know if that's more complicated or not. But from the consumer side of things, if I'm thinking about it, for these types of things, I generally dislike facets that are platform specific, because then I can't build anything generic, right? So, not everyone uses Airflow for orchestration. So how do we make it work for other orchestrating tools? And yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely understand the point that like this adds complexity to the consumer. But I'm hoping there's a way we can do it where if all you as a consumer cares about is the data lineage, then you should be able to pull just the data lineage from the spec. Right? In my mind, this should be additive. It shouldn't go replace how we do something, or it shouldn't go put undue burden on a consumer.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want that facet, don't use it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we don't want there's a question of is it going to be sent to us? Do we want these large packets with all this information we don't need? That's a different issue. That's how do you do those API calls? But I think I agree 100%. I think that a generic solution is what is best, and also something that is separate, that you can say, I do want this or I don't want this.
Yeah, I agree with that. So if it's encapsulated in facets, that's the place where this should go, according to the philosophy behind OpenLineage. Totally agreed. I think there's a separate problems that someone mentioned on this. I think Julian, you said earlier that you need to refer to the other tasks and jobs that were prior or maybe following the given job that you're looking at. So I think we also need to talk about naming schemes for jobs, because currently this is just very freestyle. So how do you refer from a job from, maybe on Airflow side to some job on the Spark side, right? So we probably want to standardize on job naming as well. And I don't think we've done a lot of that yet.
Yeah, how does that part work today? Is it like the Airflow OpenLineage integration, for example, decides what the format of the job name is? Or is it that the like OpenLineage spec says if you have a job that's an Airflow task, this is the format to expect?
So today,
Okay, go ahead, Julian.
I mean, you can take. So like today, the way it works is the integration decides how to generate the job name. And so in Airflow, it's just a dag.task, right? And the namespace is a configuration setting. So there's no standardization in the namespace. It's up to the user to make sure they put a unique namespace that identify their Airflow instance, for example. And I think, yeah, Jens have made this comment before of like, it would be great to have more of a naming convention and a spec and, define this in the OpenLineage spec instead of just leaving it up to each integration. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
But yeah, maybe to add some context to this, actually. So we do like the spec does provide guidance for naming conventions for datasets, And the reason we do that is that's how we are able to correlate and actually track lineage, right? Because we observe the jobs, and then we correlate through dataset names, right? And so that was critical for the first step, but maybe in this world, then standardizing job names starts to become critical the same way. And that also maybe pushes us for a need to do that programmatically. Because right now it's kind of, we have the naming thing and we hope that whoever writes an OpenLineage integration sticks with the convention, but there's no programmatic way of ensuring that.
Right, but I think we can make the whole point of the spec is to make the convention. Whether people follow it or not is up to them.
I think there's quite a complexity in terms of names that you might not want to leave this open for interpretation through just looking at documentation, but rather, as Harold said, to make names programmatically defined, maybe even offer sort of a small library to create names for a given system, to validate names, and maybe even to extract some meaning out of names. So I would rather go with that way, what Harold just described. I mean, we have, so from our observation within Google GCP, we have faced the same problem around dealing with names, and we've run repeatedly into trouble ourselves because we were not very diligent initially on defining how those names should look like, and we did come to the conclusion, well, it has to be defined by configuration and supported by tooling, actually.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how much do we need a human understandable name like tax workflow versus a unique identifier? Because in the governance space, the more you have words and terminology as opposed to IDs, the more room there is for interpretation or need for explanation. So getting away from that would be good, but we also don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, because then people will be like, oh, well, process 72. Oh, wait, I thought that was, doing the dishes. No, that's process 73. Process 72 is doing the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I think
maybe
in general, we want to capture lineage and ensure that the links and subgraphs we captured remain valid, even if someone starts renaming data assets, right? So we would probably rather want to capture IDs and then need to rely on other mechanisms to retrieve the current name and other metadata for the assets for which we captured the lineage.
I may be showing my limited understanding of the spec by asking this question, but do we not have the same issue with like parent-child job IDs? And like, if so, how has that worked so far?
I mean, they're UIDs, right? So it's up to the tool that ingests them to make sense of IDs to something logical.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jens, I thought you were actually saying something like more complicated than like of not having a name at all, as opposed to making sure that you have a unique identifier that's not just a text name. Also, UUIDs are like they're smaller, right? Numbers are smaller than text, so.
Right. Yeah, I think this needs some more thinking, right? Yeah, I think there's room for standardization, but yeah, I see there's different perspectives.
So maybe, Harel, maybe I'm missing something with this UUIDs, but as I'm thinking through how this could work in the Airflow world, right? You have a job that represents a task. So let's say, for your first task generates some UUID and emits that. Now your next task that runs, let's say, needs to declare that this first task ran before it, that there's that process dependency or job-to-job lineage. How does that second task know the UUID that gets generated by the first? So I was assuming the unique identifier would be something like maybe deployment name .dag name .task name, or something that is like canonical and encapsulates what that task is. Does that question make sense?
No, it does definitely make sense. So with job hierarchies, so let's take the Airflow and Spark example, right? Like that's from an Airflow DAG, we pass on the run UID of the DAG to the Spark job because the DAG knows its ID, its UID because it's using OpenLineage, right? Then for this job to job, I mean, this might be a stupid idea, but if we do standardize names and names have hierarchy, then we could use that hierarchy to also kind of infer linking. Well, actually, it's not helpful. I mean, it will be helpful for grouping, so maybe that's a good idea for other reasons, but it won't help with ordering of things.
Maybe I'm taking too simplistic a view. And did we just lose? Oh no, we didn't lose Julian. But from a generic, ETL tool perspective, right? You have an ETL tool or an orchestrator or whatever that stores all these tasks. So you have task 1 and task 2, and I've named it task 1 and task 2, but underlying there's an ID because if I ever want to change it to something else, I want to change it to job 1 and job 2, right? There's an ID that's saved underlying. So my simplistic answer is, wouldn't the software just know? So when the end user developer who is an end user goes and says, I want to make job 1 related to job 2, then the software would know those UUIDs underlying. That's how I would think about it, but tell me if that's too simplistic.
No, I don't think it is too simplistic. I know Airflow better than other orchestrators, and then unfortunately Airflow doesn't have that notion of some unique underlying ID. Airflow uses the actual task ID, the task name, as its unique ID. Yeah, but maybe riffing off of what Harel was saying, in theory, for a lot of these job to job or process dependencies, thinking of a task within a broader DAG, you do have some sort of parent-child relationship. And so all you technically need to know is that this job, this task depends on these other two jobs, and you can identify them with the task name because the task name is guaranteed to be unique within the DAG. And so then it kind of puts the onus on whoever's consuming that information to build to link the actual job with a previous job that it's seen, which doesn't feel ideal.
So
Okay, it sounds.
maybe
Sorry, go ahead.
One more thought here. So, and maybe I'm on the wrong track, but tell me. So, if we have hierarchy assigned to those job names, then different systems would have different hierarchies. So then, would we need the namespace naming scheme prefix need to declare that system? For example, saying this specific name, following in this field, right, is from Airflow or is from Spark, etc. Because we do actually have the same for the names of data sets. Here we also have the prefix is the type of the system.
I think we need to have a good way to make those job namespaces unique, right? So, if you give a name to the machine or the instance and it's unique across all the things you're running, then that's a good start. Yeah, so we can add a prefix to the job. The hardest part is more about making sure that we differentiate instances. Like in Spark, for example, it's been a bit difficult because there's no, in Airflow, you have an Airflow instance running. So this scheduler will have somewhat a host name or something that kind of you can uniquely identify it. For things like Spark, it can be a little more challenging. So it's been challenging in the past, like what's the unique identifier of the thing? starting the Spark job, and how do we have a name that's consistent from one run to the other, because Spark is not necessarily aware of it when it's coming from a scheduler. But yeah, I do agree. Like right now, it's been left up to the user. We kind of tell them, hey, put a unique namespace in there. And I think it would help to have a little more guidance. Then for the job name, as long as there's a deterministic way to make it unique within that namespace, then we can construct those names. So that's in Airflow, the dag.task is unique because that's kind of how Airflow identifies the tasks anyway. So, but it needs to be nested inside a unique namespace, right, for this to work.
I think that would make sense. I was talking about the prefix of something : / so that identifies for data sets, what type of database, etc. it is. We don't have that for job names currently, as I understand. And here it might be useful to have that, because then even only looking at that string, you know how to interpret it, because different identifiers for different systems will have different types of hierarchies.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we do have, so usually the thing that runs is the thing that produces the event. And so then you have the producer as part of the OpenLineage event, and that's a root element. So you can kind of infer that. So like, if it's the Airflow producer, then it's Airflow running, but it still would be nice to send it. But so we have 10 minutes. I'm trying to think if like A, would there are other things people want to discuss, and B, maybe this turns into like an offline.
Yeah, I agree. So I think one of us maybe should take to do a little write-up and like propose something. And then maybe as a Google Doc or in the issue, there's an existing issue. And then others can comment on it, right? So that we can converge on what this practically would look like. So I don't know, Julian, if you're interested in doing that, or if we can take it on the Slack.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to give a couple examples where I think this is important, but I don't know that I have the time, unfortunately, to write a full proposal. I'd be happy to collaborate with someone.
I mean, just those examples would be helpful, right? So then we can take that and formulate it into a proposal.
Yeah, let's start with that and follow up on Slack. I think that's good. That's a good start.
Perfect. I unfortunately have to run, but this is a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for contributing.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing this up.
Of course. Bye.
Bye. So the second discussion item was improving naming. So I don't know. I think maybe Jens, you wanted to talk about this. Is this your item? Michael had to go as well, but we can finish with that.
I don't think I added it. Sorry, I didn't. I don't think I added it. Yeah, it's
okay.
Still interesting.
So we can talk about this if you'd like, or we can talk about something else if someone has a topic they want to discuss.
While we're on naming, I'll just add that I recently refactored the naming spec to make it a bit more searchable, alphabetical ordering, just nicer to work with. This was the reason for this is because a maintainer of DBT core came and was like, oh, we're telling our DBT adapters to implement OpenLineage naming specs, but they really can't find somewhere where like, oh, this is how you should document your OpenLineage namespace and name. So we organize things a bit. Less discussion, more FYI.
Harry, you mean the textual description of the names, right? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it would still be worthwhile discussing whether we don't want this to be defined in a programmatic fashion instead of documentation, or in addition to documentation, right? But we could auto-generate documentation. We could auto-generate library to support creation and parsing validation of names.
I think that makes sense. I know like a long time ago, Benji had proposed something. I think there's probably still a ticket open in OpenLineage on how to programmatically define it. Unfortunately, he didn't get the opportunity to get to finish this, but I think it'd be great if someone picked it up to finalize like a proposal.
Julian, can you share that on Slack or somewhere?
I can share it. I have it.
Oh, you have it? Yeah, I will need to find it. But,
So we also had a thread about it in Slack here, and this is the proposal. This is how open data discovery, which is a project that I don't know if it's maintained anymore or not, but they took an approach of like creating a name generator. The only thing is that it's in Python, so it won't work for all the OpenLineage integrations, right? I jokingly proposed that we write it in Rust, but I think it's not a joke. I think that might be the best place to do it in. And then there was another proposal that someone had of maybe having like a micro REST API as part of the client that you send like the platform to, and it responds with the name. Like you send the parameters and then it responds with the name as an option.
Julian, does this somehow overlap with the registry proposal? Because I think you were thinking that integrators could register facets. Should they also be able to register names?
I think that's a good idea. Yes, and I think that came up. Did that come up in that Slack discussion? Yes. So these proposals, so the pull request 1702 is proposing to turn the markdown file into something that's more programmatic and kind of more explicitly define those things rather than text. I think the next step, it could be still a good first step to get from where we are in the spec. And I think we could start with that. And then when the registry gets implemented, it could be a good idea to say, and if let's say for vendors, right? Like if you're Google, you might say, oh, now we own the definition of uniqueness for BigQuery, for example. And we put it in the registry under Google. And this is how BigQuery is defined. And then if you need to add anything, it's maintained there. And I think that could be a good way to do this. Those things, they need to be stable, right? Like, so it's not like they can be changed after they've been defined, right? Because then what the spec brings is making sure each integration, whether they are in the OpenLineage project or not, follow the same standard for naming things. I mean, either way, whether it's in the registry or not, I would expect the people who own those data sources to come and make the PRs to add things to there. So yeah, I think we can still, I think as a first step, I think it's a good idea to decouple the registry from this and like maybe start formalizing, and then if it needs to be moved, like split into the registry, we can do that as well, right? Like, and we at least we'll have the first step, which is the most important, which is making it more programmatic rather than text that the human reads and interprets.
Now we just need someone to do the work.
I think whoever cares the most is welcome to pick it up. Yeah, I mean,
we need more engineers, hands-on engineers who care on this call, I feel.
Absolutely.
Yes. Too many managers.
I'm happy to collaborate. Like I am happy to try and find engineers, but I can't promise at the moment that we get to the scene.
Yeah, I do say, like, I do feel like if we have enough momentum and we kind of have a working group from different companies working on this together, that would help make the momentum. So Jens, happy to do that together.
Right. Yeah. Let's try at least.
So Eric mentions in the chat that it may be worthwhile adjusting timing of these calls to allow for more interested party to join, which I agree. So we did do a round of voting for this time, right? Like this change. So it didn't change much, but it changed a little bit. So I think, yes, maybe, we need to find the people and we need to maybe do a vote again. I think right now, like there's a bit of inertia on the time because the people who come vote on the time, and so it stays at the time of the people who are already coming, or it's convenient or something. Oh, let me see.
I'm biased on this
Yes.
particular point. I have a lot of colleagues that are within the IST time zone and beyond.
Yeah.
Are always
So
following me
maybe,
on the join live. I'm sorry, I have to jump to an external call. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
but thank you for contributing, Eric. I think yeah, we can think of a better way to do the polling on what time, right? Like maybe there should be a question about, are you someone who doesn't come because of the time or something, right? Like, because I think the voting kind of pushes it more to where people who already come are comfortable.
Yep.
I don't know.
Okay, I also actually have to go. I need to vacate this room. Good to
So
see
maybe
everyone.
we'll follow up on Slack about those things. See you all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, bye-bye.
All right.